Hajime!
Hey ladies and gentlemen, legionaries, this is Lance from Lance's Legion and Sergeant Barnes, and we're joined today by Ancient Gardener. Hello Ancient Gardener, how are you doing?
Doing wonderfully. How are you?
Good, good, good. Thanks so much for coming on. For those of you that don't know Ancient Gardener, he's a classical philologist guy. He's really steeped into classics, and it's obviously something you guys, if you know my writing and stuff like that, I'm very much into the classics, especially Caesar, and it just kind of helps us map out the future by seeing and analyzing the past. But today we're actually discussing something that's a lot more close to home, which is obviously, I think one of the recurring themes or conflicts is between Nietzsche and, I assume, Christianity, which I think we'll get into this deeper before, but my main thrust is that actually Nietzsche grinds the gears of Christianity or Christians so deeply because actually a lot of his critique comes from his critique of Platonism and Neoplatonism, which is the underpinning philosophy of Christianity. But that's too far ahead of ourselves. But before we get into the meat and potatoes, I mean, is there anything you'd like to say about that specific topic in your opinion?
I think that I think the meme of Nietzsche and Christianity being so diametrically opposed is the result of people not reading enough into Christianity or Nietzsche. I think that there's a huge space. I mean, I have only started reading Nietzsche, relatively recently, in earnest. But I think that there's a huge amount of overlap between the two that really gets to the core of what both, Nietzscheanism, his body of work, and really the core of Christianity contain. And I think that it's something where if we can continue, in our sphere to plumb those depths, I think that there's some very, very helpful, I think would yield very good fruit.
So I completely agree with you, and I think, the most interesting thing, and I hate being self-conscious because, I mean, in any sense, it's just always in bad taste, but if you do look at our perspective or like our area in time and space and history from a third-person perspective, a lot of our paradigm is influenced by Nietzsche and obviously the undergirding buttress of Western civilization, which is obviously Christianity. And it's interesting because to us, you and me, we live in time, and we think a century to us is like a very long time. I mean, maybe you might live a century, maybe, or the better part of one. But even if we think like during our lifetime we might see different eras or flavors of a time, but if you like really look and zoom out in the scope of humanity as such, you'll understand that it's just a blink of an eye. It's like less than a flicker of a candle. And things like, for instance, Christianity, which has been around for 2,000 years, it's just a breath, the breath of God, one breath. And I think the most interesting thing is that Nietzsche is probably historiographically the most recent, I guess, meaningful author or philosopher out there, right? I mean, he wrote in the late 1800s. He was witness to the American Civil War, or not witness, but, by proxy. And so there are a lot of ramifications from that era, especially with Marxism and the ascent of communism, and actually the full descent of the primacy of Christianity. And we're still living to see what the outcomes of those externalities are. But I mean, I'm kind of rambling here, but I guess what my point is to try and say is that here we stand at a crossroads, a fork in the road, right? We decide whether we go up or we go down. And I think people, especially like myself, when I first started reading Nietzsche, because Nietzsche is extremely critical of Christianity, that you kind of want to wholesale expurgate this entire thing. But I think as you read Nietzsche and you read, obviously, I mean, I myself, before I read Nietzsche, I was very much into Christian theology. I'm not just a Philistine. I actually read the Bible. I was very into, the different things. Personally, my story is, my background is a Catholic background, and I wanted to, I felt disgusted with the Catholic Church, and so I wanted to do the Orthodox thing. Ultimately rejected that as well, but not because I think everyone else should reject it, but just from my personal conviction. But segueing from that perspective, I guess I wanted to ask you what your background, as far as because you have a background in the classics. What's your background with Christianity and the theology and so on?
Sure. Yeah, so one of the most, I think, distinguishing things about my upbringing religiously is that I was homeschooled, and I was homeschooled almost my entire childhood. I went to school for like 1 year, and it was a Catholic school. I still don't, to this day, don't know why it was that year that I went to school. But the thing is, I also grew up. So for one, so there's that alternative, I think, foundation that I was gifted by my parents, and insofar as I don't share a kind of the mainstream understanding. I'm not really sure how to articulate it, pithily, but I didn't receive a lot of the same worldview that many others today did. And on top of that, as long as I can remember, my family has been going off and on to Latin Mass, to the traditional Catholic Mass, and so there was I remember very, very young, my parents, and family members and friends and stuff like that, making jokes about like awful New Age Catholic hymns and the cringy evangelicalism tinged versions of Catholicism. And so, but the thing about the Latin Mass is that it's very, very old. It's very, very ancient. It's very much steeped in, not just an earlier version of Catholicism, but really it's steeped in history. It's steeped in the Bible much more thoroughly than the current iteration of Catholicism post Vatican II. I didn't grow up setting up a contest thinking that it's all actually invalid stuff since Vatican II or whatnot. But so there isn't that end to it that I share, but there is, I think, a hierarchy of the two different versions of worship. And the thing is, that being so exposed to the Latin Mass really is what helped me slide into studying the classics and then studying in college and things like this. And the thing about the thing about Nietzsche versus the church, right, is that Nietzsche and many people like him, right? This thing of classical philology, this thing of philology in general, right, is completely lost today, almost completely lost, because there's been the hyper specialization or individuation of the historical, of the study of history in academia in the West, and which is to say in academia, and so. Whereas today you have this useless, largely, over particularization of different sectors of studies, like I'm an anthropologist versus I'm a historian versus I'm a whatever. Nietzsche and many of the people like him, leading up to him, kind of the academic sphere that he was formed in, that he was part of, and also that was already starting to die, had been starting to die, for a couple centuries by the time he got to it, did not take such a piecemeal view of the intellectual life. And that's the main thing about studying classically, right? That classical education itself is a little bit of a meme. And so to understand what classical philology provides is and just classical education in general, is a much not just richer but also more complete, a more whole picture of existence. And I think, as I've been getting more and more into studying Nietzsche recently, it's clear that that is a worldview. That his worldview is much more complete and whole than mine, because he's much more powerful intellectually than I am, and better read and things like this. He also spoke German, as opposed to New English like we speak.
Yeah.
But the thing is that it's very, very clear that his worldview already was antiquated by when he was writing, and it informs the crazy invectives that really make people that piss people off when they, being Christian, especially evangelical Protestant or whatnot, when they read him and they think, oh, this guy is blah blah blah, he killed God, he thinks it's good. No, they're obviously misreading this, but
or they haven't
the thing
even
is
read
that
it.
right, at all. Exactly. And so where Nietzsche is coming from is that he understands so much of what was lost. He understands so much of what we lack, and yet what informs our everyday existence, and the part of history, the kind of the course of history that we're occupying right now. And that's why I think that there is there is still a great deal of overlap between between Nietzscheanism, between really a past vitalism, between pagan belief and Christianity, because truly they are they are far more related. They are opposed in important ways. I'm not trying to say it's all one thing, but they are far more related than many people think at first sniff.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly the overriding theme is that, I mean, if you kind of conceptualize our little corner of, I guess, the cultural sphere, which is actually kind of interesting because even though we are in absolute numbers very limited, it seems like we have a lot of downstream cultural effects, which is very strange. But without patting ourselves on the back too much or measuring our dicks out, but I would say that, like, the interesting thing is that it's this constant dialectic between a heavily Christian faction and the very Nietzschean one. And I think just as much as Christians tend to be not read into Nietzsche or the surrounding philology or whatever, I think the same can be impugned against the majority of Nietzscheans, with the rare exceptions. And so, I first of all, I really appreciate that you actually came on, because it's certainly something we have to address. And I know that Zero H.P. Lovecraft actually had recently a whole podcast, 4.5 hours, about a synthesis of the two. And I think what I wanted to do, and since you come from such a point of erudition, is basically talk about the essence or the core of Christianity. And I know, I can already hear the chorus of the consecration, in the background, people saying, oh, like, there have been literally spurgs for 2,000 years arguing about what the message of Christianity really is, right? But I think if people would allow us and be generous with us in good faith and understand that we're speaking in good faith, what Christianity is, so that way maybe we can start articulating what it is that Nietzsche is critiquing, and does that really necessarily constitute Christianity, or does it constitute something else which can be expurgated, which it can be cut out of Christianity, and we can keep what is good about Christianity and thus keep the civilization that it upholds. And so I guess I just wanted to start with your basic convictions of what Christianity is at its core, its ethos. You know what I mean?
Sure. Let me, me being, the stilly underread, person that I am, I want to actually lean on some things that Zero H.P. Lovecraft, said in exactly that, that podcast. This is the part 3 of, and it's an essay too, luckily, right? So I'm going to be reading a little bit here. But the thing about, and a little bit of just theological context, I suppose. There's this idea in, I believe, specific to Catholicism. I'm not sure. Maybe people like High Church Lutheranism, Lutherans or whatnot, share this. But there's this idea that Christ came on earth in what's called the fullness of time. It was the perfect time in in human history, in the course of human history, for God to appear on earth and have his message kind of be accepted, right? And for it to proliferate, and as we've seen it done, it moved very quickly from Jerusalem to Rome. From Rome, it went into Europe. From Europe, it went into the world. Via the white civilization, white populations, things like this, colonization, all these good things. So, but the thing about Christianity is that it ultimately, at its core, it was a redemption of many different iterations of pagan ways of belief. And so there are two things that if you permit me, that I want to read here. First, a few snippets from Zero HP's piece, and then also one description of what pagan belief really was from the ancient city by Fustel de Coulanges. And this won't take too long, I promise. But one of the main things that really gripped me when I first read, and truly, all credit to Zero HP, because it was listening to him reading his these essays, these podcasts that he did, that helped me see I must read Nietzsche. I must. And why is that? And specifically, there are these few points that he makes. First off, this is about almost exactly halfway, in the podcast, but he says, what we should recognize is that Christ, excuse me, let me start the segment before. Christ is not easy to obey because his commandments are literally insane. They are the rantings of an absolute lunatic. Hence that old saw, either God or bad man, liar, lunatic, Lord. But what we should recognize is that Christ's naked insanity makes him paradoxically a supreme exemplar of pagan virtue. A little bit later, he brings this back up. There's a great line from C.S. Lewis that you can't really be a good Christian unless you're first a good pagan. Without pagan virtue, it's impossible to wholly realize the goodness of such things as forgiveness and charity. Now, end quote. Forgiveness and charity are the main, I think, things that do actually exist at the center of the Christian ethos, of the kerygma, right? What is it? It is that whatever you do on earth can be forgiven through some way of contacting or accessing the divine. In Catholicism, you still have to it's still intermediated by going to a priest and saying it in person. You can't go to confession over a phone. TV mass doesn't count. Sorry, guys. All the rad trads were correct in that. But but then in Protestant, in most Protestant, usually high church, sects, they say, oh, you need to, simply, go into an inner room, and I believe I might be misrepresenting, but go into an inner room, or go into the deepness of your heart, and and truly, seek that forgiveness, like recognize what you've done, seek the forgiveness. Now, and so this is something this is a point that spun off into, that spun off into, basically all the iterations of slave morality that Nietzsche rightly condemns. And I think that one thing that Nietzscheans often could say is that Christianity is nothing more than the deifying of the victim, of the eternal victim, of the bug man, basically, and nothing but saying that slave morality is good and that strength is bad. And what Christians say about Nietzscheanism is that, look, you must be, you must not do things for yourself, right? And this, of course, is kind of the low IQ meme understanding, right? You must not do things only for yourself. You cannot be self-aggrandizing. You can't have a will to power, because that is, then you're like Satan, bro. Satan wanted to do his own thing. So, and it's just like, it's just awful. Yeah. It's just, it's basically, it's Reddit tier, despicable thinking that is only self-serving and is not intellectually curious at all.
Right.
Now, but the thing is, when Zero HP says Christ is an exemplar of pagan virtue, right? He made that, I think, is true. That's not just true intellectually, but consider again this concept of the fullness of time. When Christ came, it was the very beginning of the Roman Empire, the very beginning, a few decades, not even, into the reign of Caesar Augustus, of Octavian, the adopted grandson of Julius Caesar, who had fought and won the civil war against different factions, for control of Rome. And he, among other things, reaffirmed an ancient religion that Rome had stuck to more. The Romans stuck to more closely than, for example, the Greek populations did. But it was a very but it was something that still had fallen out of vogue in different ways, both in the patrician and the plebeian populations. And so this is now going to Coulanges. There's just one paragraph here I want to read. This is from the very end of the book, the last. If you don't know about it, the Ancient City, dear listener, the Ancient City is a book written by a fellow writing a little bit after Nietzsche, I believe, but it goes through and does an incredible amount of fantastic primary source research on ancient ways of believing in the West. As far as we can go back, and really, this is to classical antiquity, and so to ancient Greece, ancient Rome, the civilizational forebears of the modern West. And when you read the book, is almost as though you're stepping into a different world. It opens up the world that we inhabit very, very, very widely to the point where you can't even recognize it. You had to stick with it for a long time. Okay, so it was first published in 1864. So actually, right before, a little bit before Nietzsche. And so this, it's possible that Nietzsche even read this. It was written originally in French, but I believe Nietzsche knew French as, right. Yeah, exactly. Most of the people, back in the day, if you knew, if you wanted to be in the university system in 19th century Europe, you knew French, German, and Italian. You could probably BS your way through, numerous other things. And maybe if you're, some, dirty progressive, you knew English. But so this is from, again, chapter 3 of book 5 of the Ancient City. It's from the last chapter of the book that is called, I think appropriately for this conversation, Christianity Changes the Conditions of Government. So, reading from Coulanges, we have sought to place in a clear light this social system of the ancients, where religion was absolute master, both in public and private life, where the state was a religious community, the king a pontiff, the magistrate a priest, and the law a sacred formula, where patriotism was piety, and exile excommunication, where individual liberty was unknown, where man was enslaved to the state through his soul, his body, and his property, where the notions of law and of duty, of justice and of affection were bounded within the limits of the city, where human association was necessarily confined within a certain circumference around a Prytaneum, which is the city sacred, the building that held the city sacred fire in ancient Rome, and where men saw no possibility of founding larger societies. Such were the characteristic traits of the Greek and Italian cities during the first period of their history. And he teases in the beginning of the next paragraph, but little by little, as we have seen, society became modified. So Christ is an exemplar of pagan virtue because he came in at the beginning of the strongest, most powerful period politically of the Roman Empire, one of the greatest, civilizational achievements, in recorded history. And therefore, even though his message was truly, what it did was it opened up it liberated the individual from being, from being religiously, as he says, enslaved to the state. It meant that now your religion was a personal matter. It was totally internal, and it was divorced from terrestrial things. Worship was not something that was done according to state mandated prescriptions. And this was very, very different, but also it meant that it was very flexible, and it appealed to many in ancient Rome because it gave them much more freedom and much more individual liberty in a theological and a spiritual sense. And truly it was, if this is a messy connection, I still have to really think through a lot of what I'm expounding here. And I thank you for the opportunity to do so on your podcast, Lance.
No problem.
And Sergeant Barnes. But the thing is, Christ, by being an example of pagan virtue, by being the perfect pagan, therefore was the first Christian. By saying that if you are the perfect pagan, you are in the correct state of mind to be a Christian. Like, you actually are a Christian because you have all of the prerequisites to be a Christian, and the one thing then to add into it is charity. Charity to the other, to the foreigner, to the stranger, to the people outside of your state. Religious belief is no longer is no longer relegated to only your kin. And that doesn't mean that he totally erased the connection to kin, but it means that now that connection can be had with anyone else, and it doesn't again efface the importance of patriotism, of valuing and prioritizing your neighbor and your countrymen over the stranger. But it does mean that that you are no longer religiously required to hate the other. So from this comes mercy, forgiveness, from turning the other cheek, forgiving 7 times 70 times, things like this. And so what Christ what Christ really was both the perfect pagan and the perfect Nietzschean, to be a little bit blunt and rough about it, and he was both by being a perfect Christian. And it seems as though the excesses of pagan belief were to be overly vital, overly strong, to be say no, we must destroy the foreigner, we must prioritize the city and the political, the polity over others as a matter of belief, versus the excesses of the Christian era being, no, you must always, forget yourself and your terrestrial connections, to the point of martyrdom. And not just martyrdom because you're telling the Roman officials that, no, you can throw me to the lions because I'm not going to sacrifice to your gods, but also to the point of, oh, if my child is murdered, I must publicly forgive. I must immediately, within hours, go online, go on TV, and publicly forgive the murderer. Excesses of strength, excesses of weakness, and so of course that's going to be a diametrical opposition. It's going to seem like a diametrical opposition. However, where the meeting point is when your act is in the fullness of belief, is in the fullness of practicing these kinds of things, and of understanding that Christianity is not divorced from the pagan world, because it came directly from the pagan world. And and the other thing too, the last, and I'll finish this this point here, the last aspect of the fullness of time, as a Catholic concept, is that all history points to the time when Christ is on earth. And so we can take that to understand that those years, right, those 33 years and a couple months or whatever, would therefore represent the time when you had this perfect iteration of both of belief, generally of human belief, and that therefore something that's totally pagan and totally Christian. And so the mandate for the individual then is to understand both sides, not to say I am both Catholic and this, but to say but to understand that to be Catholic, to be and which is therefore kind of the most the oldest, richest form of Christianity, as far as many people are concerned, myself included, but also to be pagan or vitalist or Nietzschean or whatnot, requires elements of what both sides, requires you to be perfectly both, and that there is a way to synthesize both of them there. But of course that's something that's open to the individual. That is the individual's job to explore how that manifests. And there's other things that Zero HP says about this. I'm not going to get into them now, but I cannot recommend the Zero HP's either The Ancient City for everyone to read, but it's a difficult book. It's kind of burdened by translationese at times, and that's something that I have many language scholars have have experience with, because translationese is something unavoidable. But also, everyone needs to read or listen to multiple times, many times over, Zero HP's series, Marooned in the Deepest Darkness of the Ultimate Nightmare Abyss. Excellent name for podcast. Because this is what it is. If we're going to make any progress in the future, we need to get over it. We need to get over the fact that, the boomer cons can do this, and the the evangelitards can do this, and the Nietzsche cucks can do this or whatnot. You need to be able to transcend all of these things. And you need to do that not in this feminine way of wonder, like, ooh, my bros online are going to be worried that I'm posting about Christ and, bathing in the blood of my enemies or something like this. The point is that it's all the individual. It's all, comes together on the individual level. And only by... Sorry, go ahead.
I didn't want to interrupt you because I just didn't want you to go too far away from this thread, but basically, just to add to your point is that, to give you guys conception of what Ancient Gardener is talking about is basically, one can't be a Christian without having first been a pagan, which is to say, one can't, you can't be magnanimous if you have no claws, which is one of the, great quotes of Nietzsche, but like basically the idea is that, there are broken slave, like beaten donkey type dudes that go around spouting piety. Yet they can't really be Christian because they never first had any power in the first place to be pious over. And I guess that's something that I think provides a dynamic understanding of Christianity, and it's part of the reason why I think that Catholicism, but most importantly Orthodoxy, or the closer you get to the origin of Christianity, the play of tradition, not just sola scriptura kind of like ethos, why it's so important is because it kind of gives that holistic understanding of life, is that they expect, priests expect to be their parishioners to be men and women, not, already broken in, domesticated, whatever the fuck. And so that is the dynamic that we're suffering from now, which I am assuming, obviously, you would probably disagree, and that's part of the overcoming that we're trying to understand, and maybe to have a revelation to us from Christ, but is the idea that, it's Christianity 2,000 years on has bred a human being, or at least a strata of human being, to be basically been born like chihuahuas instead of wolves, you know what I mean? And that's Nietzsche's critique, is that the Christians of his time, and you have to remember the 1800s, Christian of his time was just the guy that went to church on the weekends, who banged hookers during the week, who wasn't really necessarily Christian, and the ones that were necessarily self-described atheists or communists or socialists of his time, obviously communists later on in his life, were the ones that were atheists, yet they were spiritually quote-unquote Christian. And so there's a lot of, and don't get confused, audience, this doesn't mean that he's talking about the Christian. He's talking about the specimen which called itself Christian at his time. So there's this dynamic that I think people are not taking into account as well. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And if you could continue going down that thread, I just wanted to give some kind of a little bit of footnotes right there for you.
Right. Absolutely. And thank you. I am both highly domesticated and highly feral, and so if I just keep going, and not feral in a good way, in a dirty, anyway, if I keep going, please do, censor me.
No.
But the thing is that, it's look, I'm trying to find the quote right now, but the thing about talking about religion is exactly the problem that you described, right? I'm just going to read it, here. This is what Zero HP says on it. This is in an earlier episode of the same series. This, religion, is an easy topic to understand if you can maintain an impartial disposition, but it is nearly impossible it is a nearly impossible topic to talk about because it occupies a mental territory which is perpetually inflamed. In order to understand the nature of religious sentiments, one must view them from the outside. That is, we must be able to look at them from the perspective of one who is not possessed by them. and he goes on to develop this point. But yeah, it is incredibly hard for many people to hear any criticism of their belief system and not interpret it as a personal attack. And that's something that we're evolved to do, right? That's something we're evolved to over identify agency, right? To find patterns where there aren't there, or to impute intent that isn't there, because we're kind of always at various levels of threat assessment.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. And and we're also evolved to be in that tension. Like, that is where we exist. That's what the Greeks had right about the agon. It is about the contest. It is about the noble suffering that breeds the better human, that breeds the better specimen. Not just because eugenics is the other thing, but rather because that is at an individual level, at a spiritual level. That is how you move forward. That is how you move forward in your own pursuit of meaning, right? And another thing too, that and that meaning is something that's also lost a lot on the new church, right? Especially post Vatican II, because it's true, you have all these these annoying Chihuahua-like people who are just running around trying to inflict the longhouse on their fellow Christians as a matter of course, and it is simply despicable. It is simply despicable, and it is enough to help to make it is enough to where I totally get, right? I totally understand everyone who if they somewhat either reasoned their way out of attending church or whatnot, or really people who look around and say and observe slave morality and its consequences, and over feminization and its consequences, and the relinquishing and the relinquishing of of the male persona of masculinity in favor of deferring eternally to the den mother. Why would you stick around if you don't have a better reason? And I went through my own periods of lapsing in faith and whatnot. I've been there as well. But the whole thing is that most of the arguments are true. Most of the arguments, you have incredible, and if not true, then you at least have, evidence for them, right? You have a great deal of people who are just, terrible believers, and they hang on to labels that they don't deserve. And, but the thing is, the thing is also one thing to remember, and this is present in my mind because I have young children, and they're both boys, and so they are there's nothing more
Congratulations,
pagan.
by the way.
Thank you. It's great, believe me. But the thing is, like, there's nothing more pagan than a toddler boy, than a newborn infant who, the first intimations that you can observe this, if because you're up at night with them or whatever, you're looking at them all the time. The first intimations of aggression they have is say, feed me, right? Is to say, give me the appetite, fulfill my appetites, give me what I need. I will take it from you with the only force that I have, and that is to scream, right? And that is to chomp down on the bottle and things like this.
Right.
And it is pure aggression. And you don't see young girls. I'm not saying they don't get aggressive, but you don't see young girls explore the world in the same way as young boys do, because they are observed to do. They are evolved to observe rather than to explore. And so my 2-year-old quite appreciates my how old is he, like 11-week-old or whatever, 3-ish month old, and but he expresses that by just like, oh, I'm gonna come over here and smile at him and kiss him, and then just like wind up and give him a full blown, like 180-degree just slap on the head. Oh, that was great, that was sick. And the little boy is like, well, completely unfazed. And right. We domesticators are here. This, that, the other thing. So the thing is that we all start as instinctive animals. We all start from the standpoint that a pre-Christian worldview, shared, of saying, no, it is about planting your feet and claiming territory and taking what you can, because everyone is out for, and this is, I'm doing many pagans a disservice here, right? But,
that's okay.
Or much of the pagan worldview. Yeah. But the thing is that, you have this ethos that animates the pre-Christian world. You must claim your own space, and no one else will do it for you. And if someone claims your space from you and you do not defend it, that's on you, not them. You are the weak one. And so that is completely counter to Christianity. Mm-hmm. That says yield, 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 yield.
It's interesting. I mean, I guess in a way, full disclosure to the audience, and I'm sure that the people that joined my transmission often know my personal beliefs and stuff like that, make no secret of it. But for the sake of this conversation, and to maybe expound on the more inner questions that we have, I will play devil's advocate. So please, audience, don't get pissed off. Like I said, let's just play it out. But people would make the argument, especially new era, Jesus Christ, female pastor would tell you, to offer the other cheek, or that, for instance, you shouldn't accept migrants invading, raping your children, or you should, because, Jesus said that let there be no Greek or Jew, all are one in Christ, and so on. What is the I guess maybe more correct vision of that? What would you say to that female pastor? You know what I mean? Aside from Timothy 2:12.
Oh, come on! You take the easy answer from me. Yeah, like, get home, woman. I mean, I'm in the great position of never having interacted with a female pastor, consciously. So who knows what I'd say, but. The act of dying to self, that is so much of, that is so core to the Christian message, right? Christ that gave up, being the perfect God-man, lowered himself to live the life of a peasant, and proclaimed all these great things, and then gave himself up to the authorities, and died a criminal's death, right? And then overcame it and things like this, but the dying to self is first and foremost an internal and a personal, an individual, a spiritual thing. It does not mean that, and I have a dear friend. Actually, what am I saying? I have multiple dear friends, in fact, and one of them being my brother, who, and myself even, who suffer from this misunderstanding of theology, this bad catechizing, or this incomplete catechizing. That's exactly the same thing. Oh no, you should just let it happen, right? If you do something for yourself, that's fine. Or sorry. If something happens to you, like, don't oppose it. Or if you do something for yourself, then that's bad. Again, right? Yeah, Satan did that, bro. And the thing is that we're seeing the consequences in exactly that. Yeah, just let whatever, dude. Like, the Mexicans are Catholic, right? Like, don't you want more people at church? Don't you want more people donating? And like, my mom worked for years with, when she lived out here in, rural America, trying to translate between, these desperate, illegal farmer, or illegal farm workers who, were in terrible situations or whatnot. And they know that they can go to the church. They know they can go to only the Catholic Church, because the other churches won't want to talk to them. The Catholic Church, they know they can go to for help in some way. And so there'd be all these times when mom's like, "Oh, sorry, I gotta go. Priest calling me. I gotta, someone showed up. They don't speak English. My mom does not speak Spanish, but she can, but she is Brazilian, so she knows Portuguese, so she can kind of make her way through it." So the point is that, the female pastors, the trans new male pastors, who are pretty much female as well. This version of Christianity is not charitable to the self. It is not charitable to, those around you, to your proximity. And even though, Paul's line of there is neither Greek nor Jew, there's neither slave nor master, there's Greek nor Roman, Jew nor Gentile, etc. Lance, let it be known, I'm Catholic. I've not read the Bible in full. Are you kidding me? I was too busy, BSing my way through Virgil class and things like this. But So the whole thing is that it's simply, you can't invert it completely because that is not what Christ called for. And to say that, oh well, he did the money changing, like flipping the money changing tables because like historical context, bro. Like we can't understand that is stupid. It's cope.
Right.
And so, it's the thing. You have to get comfortable if you're going to take faith seriously. You have to, take life seriously normally, right? But you have to get comfortable in existing, in that state of suspension. You are always going to be in tension between these two poles, and that's okay. That's why we have two eyes, because only by having two different perspectives can we actually focus on one thing. And that's the whole thing here. Only by having both a perspective of I must be strong and protect those around me and value those around me more than others, but also, have the spirit of charity, of mercy, of forgiveness and whatnot, to a point, then, that's how you can move forward. And again, and also, let's be real here, many believers of all kinds, right, farm their, the work of their belief out to others, right? They say, I go to church, I listen to the priest, I do the minimum, I'm good, I don't read the Bible, I just listen to the priest, I kind of listen to the readings, and I try to stay awake during the sermon, and and that's like, that is the lukewarmness that Christ said is vomitous, right? That I will spew you out of my mouth, right? Like if you can be hot, you can be cold, but if you're lukewarm, fuck you.
Right. I mean, and to add to your point, if I remember correctly, one of the Beatitudes is, the meek shall inherit the earth, and for many moderns that comes across as like the losers of the world, the cockroaches of the world will inherit the earth, but that's not the case. The original Greek transliteration was, or translation rather, is actually the well-balanced, the balance between Christ and nature, if that makes sense. And I think
Yes.
a lot of sola scriptura, especially, basically, hick pastors on their own, they don't have this background that you have, which is, philology and also a background in Greek and Latin and the history and the understanding behind it, that basically, you end up having this abomination. And, I think it's really unfortunate because what ends up happening is that, especially in the American and Anglophonic world, our experience of Christianity is Protestantism. And it's not even Anglican Protestantism, it's Anabaptist, Baptist, it's all a bunch of weird, like super weird stuff. And, I don't care if you get butthurt over it. I'm sorry, like, at a certain point, like, people kind of, like, I just make fun of it, as it gets a little bit ridiculous, more and more deviated.
Yeah,
But
speaking in tongues is ridiculous. It just is. Sorry, guys.
But, to be fair, what I'm trying to get across is that, like, there's a lot more context and nuance to the conflict between Nietzsche and Christianity, and I think when Nietzsche attacks Christianity, he's not attacking the Christianity necessarily of Christ himself, and he says this often. He's attacking the Christianity of Saul. He's attacking the Christianity of the communists, basically who became a communist later on in the 19th century, or I guess the 20th century later on. And so, what was the background of that? And to give context for those of you that don't know Nietzsche's terminology of master morality and slave morality, let me just briefly define it so that way in the future when we reference it, you kind of have it in your holster there. So, master morality is basically a morality that's focused on specifically what you would associate the old warrior aristocracy of medieval and classical, Europe or Indo-European Aryan tradition to be, which is, as quoted by him, is basically everything that is good is noble, and noble in the sense of refined, basically upright, high military bearing, strong, powerful. And what was bad was what was weak, cowardly, timid, petty. Basically, whoever was a peasant was inextricably, like, within its element. Whoever was a slave or a peasant or the low guy, that was what was considered to be bad. And basically, it wasn't an understanding of being a thing in itself, which is an invention of Plato, and something that Nietzsche criticizes. Basically, Nietzsche makes the point that it's bad and good, between good and evil, good and bad, is that the aristocrat judged things whether it was salubrious or salutary to him, or like bad for him, and whatever was bad for him was bad in itself, as opposed to the Platonist understanding of good and evil, which is of course things in themselves, right? Which is where we get the delineation between the moral as formerly known, which is ends oriented. So, basically, pagan morality is focused on does this result in a good or a bad, as opposed to Platonism, which is means themselves, how you carry yourself through this life, are they good or bad? And so there's a whole I guess string or series of phrase, which is why Nietzsche is so earth-shattering in a way, especially for Christianity, because he is not just attacking Christianity superficially. And I mean, and the funny thing is that Nietzsche absolutely dogs on the pagans of his time, like for instance Guido von List and so on, who are basically just superficially, pagans, but really have become the thing they proclaim to be against. They're just basically throwing a wotan freaking dressing over Christian theology, Christian mores, and so on, and claiming them to be pagan, right? Which is completely false. But even if you go further than that, what he's trying to do is actually upend the Socratics themselves. And because you're so well read in the Socratics, I think I wanted to ask you about them and your perception of, obviously Neoplatonism is the one that actually had the most pull on Christian theology and so on, with Philo of Alexandria. But I wanted you to kind of brief us legionaries, us boneheads over here, what exactly is the difference between Plato and obviously Socrates before and after him? What is the main earth-shattering difference in, I guess, the view of the world that changed with him?
Well, quick, what do you mean by before and after? You mean like as in before and after Plato, and therefore before and after Socrates?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, and I mean, I'm well aware that their philosophical impact was only felt well after their deaths, but I mean, I guess I wanted to kind of just put it in your court, just to give a black and white for the audience to understand that, before their impulse into the world and after they had left it.
Sure. Well, first off, I think if you want to learn more about that, you should go. Folks should first read, this lovely yellow-covered book by a certain Yale graduate, Costin Alamaru, and I think it's called "Selective Breeding and the Birth of Philosophy." And he touches on. Look, he doesn't actually grapple, so specifically with the before and after of Plato. But it's, a lot of people, I think, do a disservice in reading, and thinking, they do themselves a disservice, and therefore, others around them, by reading only Plato, only the Socratic dialogues, and maybe a little bit of Aristotle, or maybe they really like Aristotle, and they only read a little bit of Plato, but they simply ignore the pre-Socratics. And it's easy to ignore the pre-Socratics. We don't have much from them. And the things that we do have from them need to be heavily explained, because they're so fragmentary for much of the time. And so, so if anything, whereas it is possible to get a decent, if you're intellectually sound enough, it is decent. It is possible to get, a good and accurate understanding of Socrates versus Plato versus Aristotle just by reading them on your own. You do. I would very much recommend people to not simply attempt to read pre-Socratics, solely, but to, figure out, look, is there a trustworthy lecture series? Is there someone else I can ask? Are there books on these people that I can read? Because they do really benefit from being contextualized by experts. Because for one thing, a lot of the experts, were were still, became experts when the university system was strong. But the point is, you want to learn about the pre-Socratics, read books about them as well as the writings of them that we
You
have.
know, back in the day when scholars actually had to have a 140 IQ or above even to do the liberal arts, so it was actually impactful. And for those that are actually looking for philologists and so on, look no further than Nietzsche. He actually gives you some of this background as far as Heraclitus and Thales. But continue, please.
Right. So, one thing that one thing that that Alma brings up in selective reading, but also that Nietzsche brings up in Genealogy of Morals very, very early on. It talks about the pathos of distance, right? And now they both Nietzsche and Alma bring it up as, oh, this is the pathos of distance is what allowed the aristocratic person to be aristocratic and to separate themselves from the low, the base, the plebeian, etc. But the thing is that, and I think that you touched on this, earlier as well by saying, look, the key thing about Platonism is the forms, is the idea that, that you can know something in isolation, that you can, through analysis, this is something that, of course, Aristotle brings up, Aristotle, expounds on in his own work. But through dialectic, through analysis, through well-meaning conversation or whatnot, you can come to know not completely, but more closely the nature of a certain specific thing, and that is a very very much a departure from from pre-Socratic thinking, among other things, because frankly, Lance, now now I'm thinking, man, I really need to go back and review all this stuff myself. But but interestingly enough, too, this is also reminding me that much of my own engagement with pre-Socratics came when I was able to suspend a semester abroad in Europe, and to go into to listen to lectures at the Temple of Olympia, the Temple of Zeus, Zeus
so
Pater
awesome.
at Olympia, and things like
That's
it was
fucking
incredible.
metal.
It's Rome's cool, like Europe is cool. Go to Greece. Go to Greece. Don't worry about Athens. Don't worry about this place. Go to the old sacred sites. There is incredible power still lurking there. There is, and that is where the true patriotic spirit of the Greek nation today, I think is the finest, because you find the people at those parks, at these places. You find the people that do truly value these things for what they are. Go to Delphi. Spend a couple days in Athens, going around this, the Parthenon, and to Athens and things like this. It is incredible, but do not only stay there. Get on a bus, deal with it, go all over the country. Spend 2 weeks in Greece. Do it. But again, so the pre-Socratics, wouldn't have grouped themselves as the pre-Socratics, right? They all were their own things. They're all, they're very, very, very influential in their own rights. You can go on and on about Anaximander versus Anaxagoras versus Heraclitus. I think that Heraclitus probably is the best known pre-Socratic, because of his very, very compelling writings on how nature is defined by change, nature is defined by flux, by the fact that all things are in a constant state of change, and that nothing is the same. There's some really low IQ Catholic takes out there, like, oh, like, so you're just saying it's all relativism, bro? Like, that's pretty cringe. Like, it's like, oh my god, like, the people who read too much Chesterton and then still masturbate and then feel bad about it, things like this. But the thing is, and so what Plato introduced by saying, yes, it is the form. You can know these things. You can access them in your own head. It's not just that. Okay, well, the idea that things have valence in isolation, like without their relations to other things, right? That you can kind of, and truly, if you go through and do and look at some of the, this is across the dialogues, very, very many of them, but especially I think in Meno, especially in the. I'm not going to, certainly in the Meno, I'm pretty sure in Gorgias as well. Two texts that just have, really strong examples of this. But if you walk through this process that they lay out of like, oh, what is the form thing? What is the form? What is the essence of this thing? Right. And this is, some things are built on later by Aristotle and then much later Thomas Aquinas. But, it is an erasing, right? The process of trying to figure out what the form of something is, right, is erasing the details, erasing what, the accidents of, of what Aristotle called the accidents, the accidental features of these things, as an attempt to get to the essence of something. But when you do that, it's the same thing as as what we're seeing in today. It's the same act as saying, diversity is our strength, but really they're saying this as a political tool, just as that we just need biomass. We just need like more bodies to throw at you because we don't like you. And, we want these things to, by saying that we value, the multiplicity of life ways more than any one particular life way, we are immediately devaluing any of those life ways and, individually. And we're not really, caring any at all about the details of them. Right. And so this is how you get this, contemporary progressive understanding of like, oh, I love Indian culture. The food is so good. Have you had lamb sog and stuff like this, and it's, and so it's, it is a complete, denuding of, of the riches of reality. And so, and whereas, and we know relatively little about the pre-Socratics, compared to the impact, that's, Socrates and Plato had, especially Plato. And, the apocalypse will happen, and our species will die out, and people will still be fighting about what is truly Socrates and what is truly Plato in the in the dialogues that we have, right? Course, yeah. But really, I think that's the thing, is that you had, because what is it to say, oh, we should seek to know the true essence of something, or the true form of something. It is to remove yourself from nature, or to remove that thing that you're studying from nature. And to say that it is more important to know, this alleged essence of something rather, in itself and how it exists in itself, rather than to know it in context, in situ, right? How it exists in nature. And truly, a lot of the, a common way to introduce pre-Socratic thinking and thinkers to, in like an introductory course or whatnot, is to focus on how they believed, what they believe the fundamental elements of nature are, right? And so, to consider, okay, what is the, hey, well, Heraclitus thought everything was change, right? But then this other guy thought that everything was, things were mostly water. Like water was the prime element in these other things, right? So this is where you get the classical understanding that it's often thought to be only alchemical. But alchemy itself is kind of an extension of this ancient worldview. That was brought back into vogue, in medieval Europe, and when people started studying these things in earnest again after they started stopped killing each other for a little bit. And,
right. Hermeticism, right? If I'm correct.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the fact that it was able to percolate long enough, in certain places, like, oh, great. Well, how about these ideas, guys? But the thing is that, so you first, is a good way to first encounter the pre-Socratics to differentiate them, or rather to distinguish them from each other by saying, what did these people believe, was the essence of nature? Was it fire? Was it earth? Was it air? Was it water? Was it not just air, but wind? Was it, was it inertia? Was it gravity? Was it the fact that things all stop? Was that the fact that things all move? Was it the fact that, is it all built up first from dirt, first from stone, first from earth? Is it all, actually fire? And that's why, the human body is hot. Was it all water? And that's why, as you watch things rot away, like they all kind of get liquidy, things like this. And it's, yeah, exactly. And right. So and it's a good way to, to start thinking about, okay, well, why were they saying these things? Was it just because they were watching, rotting corpses or whatnot? Or is it for the deeper reasons? Is it for, different, considerations of, what is the animating force of existence? What is it? This is the thing, is it numbers? Is it math? These kinds of things. And so, is it the fact that things are all related to each other? And so, what Plato did was, get very, very popular. And also, we also have, Plato's in a privileged position to our days, right? There's one of the worst things about studying the classics is that you have all these references to these people who are lauded by all the greats that we have, say no, but really, I think the smartest guy is this guy, and we have no idea. We have no writings from this person. One, for example, in the Roman world, all of the great orators, Cicero, etc. Many of the great satirists, Virgil and all the great poets and things like this from Roman times, make reference to an M Varies. An M Var is either Varies or Varro. I think it's Varies though. We don't know who M Varies is, but all of them, all of these great names say, truly, I am nothing in light of the master M Varies. And it's like, oh, who is this guy? We've no idea. We have no records of this guy. We have no fragments. No one's quoted him. It might just be a joke. It might be like a rhetorical device, but he is so widespread across a huge length of time that we have no idea who these guys are. And so who this guy is, and yet everybody, respected him. And so, until, we can go back in time and get stuff from the Library of Alexandria, or we can, find another Dead Sea Scrolls type of repository somewhere, before Israel blows it all up, and trying to whatever, we don't, we can only work with what we have. And so, but right now you're thinking about Plato, you're thinking about his effect. It truly does reside in the fact that, oh no, you can look at things in isolation, which means that you can look at yourself in isolation, which means that you can look at, you can start to think about yourself as an independent, an individual soul, individual person apart from the state. And so, and another thing that, that Coulange, explains in his book at length is how very early on in the Greek civilization, you had people relinquishing these older pagan forms of belief because they're into other stuff, the agon, for example. But one of the things that Christianity built off of, by subsuming Platonism so thoroughly, was the idea that as we touched on earlier, the idea that you have something totally inaccessible to others within you, like that is a core part of your person. That is the part of your person. Christianity says that is the part of your person that whence worship and religious piety and all spirituality really emanates. It is not first and foremost from following the rituals, following the traditions, but it is actually from your today we call it, your personal relationship with Jesus Christ, your Lord and Savior, or whatnot, and that's the Platonist thing. And that is what, it's frustrating to people interrogating it, because it is actually inscrutable, because we all, live and die alone in, in the space, the solitude of our own minds, our own internal, dialogues, whether you, cultivate that or not. And so, and again, we see this kind of come to its, become whole in the person of Christ, right? Saying that he is literally saying, "I am the Son of God," but he's a nobody. But there's no one who can falsify that, right? There's no one who can, and so you're going to have to take these things literally on faith, and the rest is, as they say, the rest is history.
Well, the most interesting thing that I would add is that basically a lot of what Nietzsche was doing is overcorrecting. And he even says in so many words that basically he doesn't expect you to be him. And he always explains through all of his books that nihilism is only it's a halfway point. There will always be a spirituality. And in the context of course, my podcast and the transmission here, in all seriousness, the idea is to imbibe a warrior ethos and so on. And so to give reference or context to this conversation while we're doing it is because ultimately what we're trying to achieve is basically either a revelation of a warrior ethos or mores or way out of the predicament of the psychological warfare that we're undergoing, the subversion. Because a lot of leftist peasant revolutions are successful because what aristocratic people don't do is the legwork, is the intellectual legwork required as a requisite to actually stop. Because otherwise what happens is basically what happened with the liberal revolutions of 1776, 89, 1848, is that even though you crush them at their birth physically, you are only doing a Sisyphean type rock like climb up the hill for it to just come back down again. The weights, the inertia of the philosophy comes back down because you haven't addressed the basis foundation. And so that's what Nietzsche is getting against. Ultimately, he is an aristocratic radical, right? And his idea is basically trying to search for those who, in no uncertain terms, are able to come up with new valuations of an aristocratic ethos. And for those of you who don't know, everything that is aristocratic is necessarily a warrior ethos. It never has been anything else. Bourgeois or peasant, all that stuff is lowercase stuff. And you see this often, especially in Constantin Leroux's new book, which I can't recommend enough. He makes it. He does some anthropological digging, and even brings up, for instance, the Tutsi in Rwanda, who were pastoralists and who valuated war and the ability to do pathos of distance and different valuations. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that many will read Nietzsche and reject him because of what he says specifically, but people should be reading Nietzsche because they should take inspiration from him, and because what his Nietzsche is not an end, he is a beginning. He is just trying to sweep away things that are no longer useful to us and to provide you with maybe an engine towards something you evaluate yourself. And part of the conversation of Christianity is that Christianity has been so thoroughly subverted, or rather the context of Platonism. And it's very interesting that a lot of Marxists and stuff, they always really graft on to Platonism itself, because there is this ethos around it that's kind of like a Borg mind vision of the theistic vision of life, that we're all connected to one thing and thus we must be one or whatever. But what I'm trying to point out is that basically Nietzsche is getting us to think outside the box, not necessarily giving us a prescriptive, if X, then Y. Now, I guess what I wanted to ask you is that, with the synthesis and a lot of his critiques, put that all aside, I think, I ran into, especially when I was in the military, many men who were Christians, but they were Christians out of habit, and also because I think conservative minds, I'm not really conservative, I'm actually what's called a progressive or whatever, but it's just a different mental model of how things are. I don't think old things are good because old. I think some things that are old are good because, they have a good telos, they have a good trajectory, you know what I mean? And so I think what is lacking today is a real valuation of difference. And I guess what I wanted to say is this. Here, Nietzsche talks about, for instance, the evangel. And he speaks about those who accept the evangel are necessarily beyond sin, if that makes sense. Obviously, people can sin and they can be absolved from sin. However, what he's trying to say is that ultimately you are beyond making mistakes per se, and that you're always on this certain trajectory. And so I guess what I wanted to kind of ask you is that, is there a soundbite maybe that you'd say, what is Christianity to you? Like, point by point, just like maybe a sentence long, what is it really? Because to Nietzsche, I think it's about being humble, being, basically a peasant, being a slave, offering the other cheek, and so on and so forth. But I mean, to you, really, what is it? Is it love, really? Is it is it the striving for truth? What is it? Do you think it is that could be the difference between what many people see it and what it could be?
I think that practical point that demonstrates the value of Christianity is self-possession through self-dispossession.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about having charity for others as a baseline way to interact with them is not that you are filled with good feelings and you're such a nice person and you have the warm fuzzies, but it is that you are gaining you're allowing the strongest possible version of yourself to emerge when you are working for others. And that is not, and that strength is not just spiritual strength. It is actually physical strength. And, and you can find this in many different, in anything from, blasé self-help books to, the deepest and oldest philosophical and religious traditions, is that you must not do things only for yourself. We are inherently self-interested creatures. Mm-hmm. Everything we do is already automatically for ourselves. Everything. Aristotle identified the three versions of friendship, but said that by far the most common is the friendship of utility. You do things for other people because they can do things for you, or because it serves you in some way. All friendships are friendships of utility. All relationships are relationships of utility. It's just that some are very few are a little bit more than that. Mm-hmm. And this idea, self-possession through self-dispossession, touches on a very important quality about the transcendent, about transcendence, about the capital T transcendent. And so briefly, let's consider drugs, psychedelics. You have people paying top dollar to be led through ayahuasca or DMT sessions, and have been doing this for decades, actually, right? Because they believe they can kind of, they can buy their way, they can transact their way into a religious experience. And they miss the mark on what religious experience really is. What they do is they open up their different mental receptors, and all their perception shifts, and they view things in a different way. And for some it's incredibly terrifying, and for some it's incredibly enlightening, but for the most part it's kind of addicting, right? There is a great tradition in Catholic mysticism that, or rather, there is a great mystical tradition in Catholicism. And the main thing about mystical or transcendent experiences, like what you can kind of imitate by dropping acid or something, but what you can also achieve through fasting or meditation or whatnot, is that you cannot force them. They are not deliberate. You cannot, on command, have a transcendent experience. They are only ever emergent. And Thomas Aquinas says somewhere, I have no idea where, but he says somewhere that the thing to do, and frankly it might be St. John of the Cross, but the thing to do is not to focus on the transcendent experience, is not to focus on that ecstasy. It is not to desire the ecstasy for itself. It is to be, what you should do is to be grateful for the ecstatic experience, as fleeting and as breathtaking as it was, and get back to work. Mm-hmm. Because it's not about you, because everything's already automatically about you. You must take that self-interest and put it in service of others in order to achieve the highest form of self-possession. And so the idea of dying to self, the idea of working for others, the idea of being charitable to the point of death, or faithful to the point of death, or loyal to the point of death, is that this, doing so holds the highest form of physical existence that we have. And I'm sorry that wasn't, perhaps pithy as three sentences, but that's truly what it is. And that's again the core of so many other religions. And I think that many people get too caught up in the idea that, the Catholicism is like the deepest and the most full picture, the deepest and like the perfect iteration of religion. Like there's nothing more to it, and that elides the very brutal and scary truth that all humans and all humanity and the entirety of human experience is necessarily limited, in a gazillion different ways. Mm-hmm. And so even if we do get, based pontiff and we get the Catholic space emperor and we have 1,000 years of the Catholic monarch or whatnot, sounds great, whatever. That will not be anywhere near, the truth of, not just God's love and God's existence in heaven and all these other things, right? But it will be nowhere near the fullness of what it is to be, to have a life of meaning or to be happy or content or whatnot.
Do you mind if I interrupt a little bit?
Please.
It's interesting that you say that, because I guess what you're getting at is 2 points, which I keep on harping on in general with life, is that happiness is a red herring, and I assume ecstasy falls under that kind of same category. But secondarily and most importantly is that Schopenhauer talks about this, about whether experience is orgasmic or it's nirvana, right? And basically self-abnegation, or if it's self-affirmation, right? And the interesting thing that you said there, and which is probably the most important and most vital aspect of Christianity, is that you have affirmed yourself into like self-renunciation, if that makes sense, which is the totality. That's what it is. It's a genius. Not that really you could say that's a genius as far as like artificial construct of. I don't think it's really artificially constructed, but what I'm trying to say is that is the most powerful thing about Christianity, is that it is the totality of spiritualism, right? And I say that I'm not even a Christian myself, but that is the most powerful aspect of it. But please continue.
Right. It's kind of like that god-awful Churchill quote. I think it was Churchill that said, democracy is the worst form of government except all the other ones we tried, right? And, it's kind of a similar thing. It's that Catholicism is the best, it's the best, or at the least the most, honestly explored religious tradition we have. Mm-hmm. And all religion, right? The tradition of religion is the tradition of trying to access the inaccessible, right? Zero HP expounds, very usefully on the idea of the divine contradiction, and you must have an element of insanity. You must have an element of contradiction within a religion for it to be a religion. And it's one of his, he lays out in the very first, in part one of the Functionalist Understanding of Religion, he has 6, tenets of what it is to be a religion. They're all his, thinking, and I think they're quite brilliant. And one of them, of course, is the hidden knowledge, gnosis. Is actually the first one, and part of believe this is where the contradiction falls into it. But the thing is, the incredibly cringe, but also frustrating, but also addicting and animating aspect of utopian philosophies like Marxism, communism, etc. Right, but also progressivism, and also believing in the science and things like this, believing in the radical materialism and things like this, is that we can eventually we can brute force or math our way into the divine, into accessing the divine, which you can't. We will never, and you can't because of the non-physical existence of the divine, because the divine is only something that occurs internally. It does not manifest in reality. And we even see this in some of the more famous apparitions in the Catholic Church, right? You look at the story of Fatima, and people have thought everything from these shepherd children were eating psychedelics accidentally because they were poor and hungry out in the fields, to UFOs came down, to blah blah, right? Um, but the thing is, it's an interesting detail that at the first couple of times that the Blessed Virgin was supposed is supposed to have appeared to these three children, the two girls they all could see her, but the two girls could hear her, and the boy could not, because the boy did not believe strongly enough. The boy was more callous, and these are young children, and they're all they're made callous by the adversity that they had already experienced then at this point. And and it was only after internal revision, right, internal commitment to his faith, that even this young child, 11 or something like that, this young boy could then later hear at later apparitions, after several, when he could only hear, could or rather when he could only see, could hear the Virgin Mary. Mm-hmm. And and earlier you made a point of Nietzsche is an overcorrection, but the thing is that if you've ever had the misfortune but also the exhilaration, the ecstatic terror to be in a skid in a car at high speed, even in a simulated way, if you take a defensive driving course or whatnot. Mm-hmm. The way, if you are suddenly grabbed by black ice and you're going 50 miles an hour and you're turned at and you're heading straight, but suddenly you're turned at a 45-degree angle to the road. Mm-hmm. The way to get out of that is not to kind of gently nudge the wheel the other way. It is to overcorrect the shit out of the wheel and and hang on for dear life. And then as soon as the skid starts correcting, you yank the wheel the other way. Maybe not the entire way, but you have to, you're suddenly in this adrenaline fueled moment of of time slowing down, and your reactions get Superman like, and you can holy shit, I just saved me and my 13-year-old sister from certain death on this rural icy road. And and the classical understanding of sin, from the Greeks, is not being bad. It's not disobeying mommy. Listen to your mother. No, it is hamartia. It is missing the mark. It is shooting the arrow and missing because you're an idiot. Because you haven't practiced enough. Because you're stupid and weak. But you can be less stupid and less weak. But you have to do that, but not by being exactly as strong as you need to be and exactly as smart as you need to be when you are. No, it's by doing putting yourself under intense pressure, by studying for hours, by lifting heavy things, by standing naked in the light of the sun, things like this, right? It is by doing extreme things, by overcorrecting the other way, that suddenly, when the moment comes, you can hit the mark. You don't know when the moment's going to come. You don't know when you will be, when excellence will be demanded of you for the sake of others, especially. But you can prepare for it. And to prepare for it, you need to identify, where you're primarily not. You don't need to have good self-esteem and be compassionate with yourself and practice self-care. No, fuck that. You need to understand your points of weakness, and you shouldn't be, the little girl, that I've been, my whole life. Right? It's like, oh, I'm so bad, I need to focus on that badness, and that's enough. No, it's not enough. You need to overcorrect in the other direction. You need to spend more time, doing what some people would call LARPing, right? Like, just doing what to be the beneficial thing. Mm-hmm. And in order, by doing a series of overcorrections in one direction or another, you will more closely, you will get out of that skid eventually. Mm-hmm. You will still be skidding because we're all imperfect humans, but you will get closer and closer to to true north, or to straight, or to toward the bullseye. Your arrow's trajectory will get closer to the target, the center of the target, and that is incredibly difficult.
And that's the difference in ethos between you and, I guess, the paradigm of today, which is basically even self-described. It's just basically nihilists in the form of a Christian faith, but basically they believe that because sin is inevitable, ultimately, it is acceptable to sin, rather than, of course, saying, like, well, actually, the difference is that they encourage sinning, or rather they're indifferent to it, whereas you're saying that ultimately we focus on the discipline despite the fact that we may err, that we still endeavor to better ourselves, despite the fact that we will have missteps, slip ups. In fact, we might even go in the 180-degree wrong fucking direction all our goddamn lives. But our duty and our discipline is to continue on and to get better despite that. And so that is really the crux, because Nietzsche even talks about passive nihilism and the inability to evaluate things by weakness of will. And if you if you really read him, and to be frank with you, actually have it here if you have the patience to hear me out really quick. But
Please.
yeah, no, it's actually very interesting because it talks about nihilism as such, and this comes from The Will to Power, by the way. So I'll start here. Ba-da-bop. Trying to find the damn thing. God dang. Here we go.
Yeah, for context, DMs, Lance was the one who told me, stop reading Will to Power. Go read something else first. Do not read Will to Power right now. It's like, okay, fine.
Yeah, for the record, I mean, a lot of people, especially even Nietzscheans, they don't consider it canonical because there's a reason why this is a compilation of unpublished writings. So it's kind of like reading Clausewitz. Clausewitz wasn't meant to be published because he hadn't finished it, and he asked to, not to be finished, but he still did it anyway. But I think it's still salubrious. It's salutary to understanding him. But I think it's one of those interesting parts as far as when it comes to active and passive nihilism. And I'll just start reading here if we're ready. So, the perfect nihilist, and this is 21, aphorism 21. The nihilist's eye idealizes in the direction of ugliness and is unfaithful to his memories. It allows them to drop, lose their leaves. It does not guard them against the corpse-like pallor that weakness pours out over what is distant and gone, and what is does not do for himself, he also does not for the whole past of mankind. He lets it drop. And so, continuing on, nihilism is ambiguous. Nihilism is a sign of increased power of spirit as active nihilism. So he differentiates the types of nihilism, of course, and we'll talk about nihilism, passive nihilism. So B, nihilism as decline and recession of the power of spirit as passive nihilism. So nihilism as a normal condition, he goes on, it can be a sign of strength. The spirit may have grown so strong that previous goals, convictions, articles of faith have become incommensurate, for a faith generally expresses the constraint of conditions of existence, submission to authority of circumstances under which one flourishes, grows, gains power, or sign of a lack of strength to posit for oneself productively a goal, a why, a faith. And so, before I continue, this is what General Lance, I do. I basically feel as though I'm too constrained by Christianity, but I'm not advising those of you who are Christians to fall into what I'm doing. This is what I think, liberals are into, and I'm going to talk about right now, which is passive nihilism. I continued reading Nietzsche now. It reaches its maximum of relative strength as a violent force of destruction, as active nihilism, and then the opposite. The weary nihilism that no longer attacks. Its most famous form, Buddhism, a passive nihilism, a sign of weakness. The strength of a spirit may be worn out, exhausted, so that previous goals and values have become incommensurate and no longer are believed. So that the synthesis of values and goals on which every strong culture rests dissolves and the individual values war against each other. Disintegration, and whatever refreshes, heals, calms, numbs, emerges into the foreground in various disguises. Religious? Oh, here we go. Religious or moral or political or aesthetic. Does that sound familiar to you, Ancient? Does it sound familiar at all? So as you can see, like, so for those, I'm going to speak in English now because obviously I'm after a long day. It's mad late at night. I'm personally tired, so I apologize for my Philistine-like reading from the book. But what Nietzsche's getting at is that despite, however nihilism dresses itself up as, you can identify nihilism, at least passive, weak body, fat-ass nihilism, when it basically cannot even acquiesce to the original goals that it wanted out of weakness. And you see this with liberal Christians because, for instance, I went to this crazy Anabaptist church, which the new, Vatican II era of Christianity, obviously not everyone's Catholic, but it's a very good demarker of the 1960s onward, is basically Christians aren't even able to live up to the goals of Christianity, and so they lowered those goals and made them redundant, and hence why you hear the term Christianity and God is love as an excuse to fail to want to live up to those goals. And so the interesting thing is that what we're combating is not necessarily a set of ideas, right? What we're combating is a lack of thumos and spirit. Because even to be a Christian, in my eyes, it takes strength. You have to have a strength to constantly do the Sisyphusian labor of continuing to acquiesce or devote yourself to a rugged and difficult path of the Christian, right? But what these people want to do is renounce it. It's self-abnegation. It's basically a devaluing of those very things that are enumerated in the Old and the New Testament, and basically running a salve over the wounds that they enmesh in themselves to fail to live up to those own standards, and basically say to themselves that it is acceptable to be nothing. It is acceptable to not even live up to your standards, to say that you're a Christian in name only, and that is good, and to be a loser is good, because they don't even want to actually go out there and let those dogs hunt for the goals that they have enumerated. You know what I mean? Because out of weakness. And so really the enemy of our time, which I'm trying to get to people, is not one or the other. It's not a set of moral values per se or goals. Although we might have disparate goals, you and I, as me, I guess I would be considered a Nietzschean or pagan or whatever, and you a Christian. The difference between us and them is thumos. It's that spiritedness, of that willing to get after, the will to have your spiritual dogs to hunt. They are so weak that not only do they expect themselves, or they renounce themselves of the need to have goals, but they reject all others who want goals, period, as such. And so that is the question of our time. It is what is called in physics, of course, heat death of the universe, but in this context, it's spiritual death. It's the type of person who cannot even live their own lives, that cannot even have values beyond simply tearing down what reminds them of what is so low in themselves. But with that, I'll hand it off to you if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, it's very interesting that the people who are guilty of doing that are the same ones who, will point to the obese lesbian black women and and hold them up as paragons of virtue and spiritedness and vitality. Mm-hmm. And this is, I think that speaks for itself. But no, exactly. This is what our supreme leader BAP calls mere life, right?
Right.
That's the thing. The battle is not one of this or the other. The battle is life versus existence. And having been I think the first time I ever had political agency over something, right? Rather, the first time I tried to develop political opinions of my own, was when I learned about the pro-life movement or whatnot, But you look at then this is kind of going back to also the woman pastors saying bring the migrants, right? Is that there's so much error in such a movement because it really is actually guilty of only valuing the mere life, right? It's like, oh, just as long as they're born. As long as they're born. We just want them to be born. We just want the babies to be born. We just want them to be born. We just want more babies. And it is a true criticism of the movement to say, oh no, you don't, what about after they're born? What about blah blah blah? Give us more money for welfare. Let the single moms blah blah blah. So, and this is entirely correct. And the thing is that we have the thing is that we this is the battle of our time, but our time is not the 60s until now. Nietzsche saw that this was the battle of our time. It's the same battle as what he was going, was what he perceived to be true in modernity, and it's the same battle that has been waged since. I don't think it'd be accurate to say for all of time, right? But this is since the technological world, began taking shape in the very early technological revolutions of post-medieval Europe. And much of that technology being first, we have enough money and stability and political power to where we can support centers of learning. So a lot of the technological improvement first was intellectual advancement, and then that manifested physically as technology, whatever, printing press, better halberds, different military formations.
Right.
And I think for example, and actually consider the military. Only up until very recently, it was considered that the highest the smartest people, the most, and not just the most, the most warrior-like men, but the most intellectually engaging, and invigorating and fulfilling activity you could engage in is, was warfare, was battle, strategy, was planning these kinds of things, because it is such. In the same way that philology is considering everything, is considering, the richness of the civilization that's long past and its connections, both to those that came before it and, what came after it. Considering the military situation, especially when you have mass moves of troops and pitched land battles and things like this, and all of this, incredibly spiritually deleterious forms of warfare that we have going on right now. Drone strikes, etc., but also, simply not seeing your enemy, being too distant from them. Considering all of the fact, being excellent at managing an army, was the pinnacle of achievement. All of the greatest minds went to the military, not because daddy was in the military, but because that's where the greatest minds could succeed the most. That was what provided the most nourishment.
Thank you.
And it is not for nothing that coincided with the highest levels of thumos.
Yes, and the interesting thing is, and I keep on harping on this, is that until the late 1800s, every officer was expected to be educated not simply in the techniques of war, but also the liberal arts as well, because you are meant to be a complete human being, which is what a warrior is, right? Is the ability to take and give life, to govern, to destabilize, or so on. And it takes a total person. I mean, you have to be physically, mentally robust and dynamic enough to rise to the occasion. And the reason why you're seeing such a messed up Byzantine-esque version of the military of the United States today, and the reason why there are so many messed up specimens in the military today, and I've seen it personally firsthand, is because the emphasis of culture or of life now is about mere material, and it's not about a higher aspect or aspiration of spirituality and so on. But I took this torch away from you. I apologize. I'll give it back right now.
No, I mean, you're exactly correct. And what happened, one of the great, it's not just technology, that's to blame for these kinds of things, technological advancement. Oh, we could shoot people, past the horizon. We could, dig trenches and go bang, 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 bang much more quickly with our, our new machine guns or something. The lesson of the Christmas truce in World War I was that when these people got together, they were no longer enemies. When these opposing sides, when they were actually closer together, and when they were actually closer together, they humanized each other. They were able to see the worthiness of each other, and and it's not just and And you would not have, I think, in a similar, if you had a Christmas truce in Russia and Ukraine, you wouldn't have, you know, you wouldn't have the emergent soccer game break out between the lines because of the ceasefire, because of the holiday ceasefire, and whatnot. Society no longer values such higher things. And one of the reasons it does not value such higher things is because of the effect of women and feminine thinking and hyper-feminization of, you know, public morality and of all aspects of society. But the issue, you know, one of the greatest evils, and it truly is an evil, of the rampant technological progression is the ability for for the role of the feminine to be totally effaced and taken out of its proper context in a society. Instead, for it to be metastasized, you know, into the form where we have it now. And because truly, okay, I will not venture down this avenue very far, Lance, but if you'll permit me.
Yeah, of course.
A woman is, as I was saying earlier with the young children, young, and you and anyone who has, I do not have daughters of my own yet, and perhaps I'll have them, perhaps I won't. The fact that we're, you know, on a heating up streak with 2 boys means, you know, helps us have all these great fantasies, like, oh, we're gonna have, like, you know, 12 sons. It's gonna be sick. But when you observe small, you know, very, very young, 1 to 3-year-old girls versus 1 to 3-year-old boys, the girls will sit and they will watch. They will not act. They will sit and they will watch and see what other people are doing. They will look at mom. They will see what other people are doing, and they will wait to see what the situation is. They are concerned with observing and, you know, and considering the context that they're in. They're much more concerned with survival, with preservation of the self. Whereas the male children are much more concerned with, what is this thing? Let me discover it. Oh, I can climb up here now. I can grab this. And so when you have that scaled outward, when you have, and, you know, and my theory about this, you know, I'm sure that if I looked around, I'd find support for it, but, you know, I'm always right anyway. So, but the thing is that, you know, my idea.
Ooh, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we got cut off here, but I will say this: he's gonna come back on. Part 2 is just around the corner, so stay tuned. This is Lance's Legion. This is Sergeant Barnes, and this is the War Room signing off.